Now let's dig a little deeper into Docker containers. Let's understand the concept of Docker containers. The reason we are discussing Docker containers because Docker is the suo moto for container technologies. Rocket is also there, but that is not as much used as Docker. When you think of container, you think of Docker, or when you talk of Docker, you are actually talking about containers. So Docker has multiple components. The first one is the Docker daemon, which is installed on a host or on a server, and it manages everything. It does all the work. It manages the Docker objects such as Docker images. It runs containers. It manages network between multiple containers. It manages the underlying storage volumes between the containers and the underlying hardware, and a lot of other stuff also. So you install Docker daemon on a particular machine, and then you install a Docker client. Now the Docker client can be installed on the same machine or on the same host as that of the Docker daemon, but you can install Docker client on a separate machine also. So Docker client is used to interact with Docker daemon. You use commands like docker build, docker run, docker compose, etc. to talk to the Docker daemon. For example, suppose you are running this docker build command. So the Docker client would push this build command to this Docker daemon, and Docker daemon will actually create the image, which is the isolated packaged environment, and put it in something called a registry. So registries are used to store Docker images. There are multiple registries available. Docker Hub is one of them. Elastic Container Registry by AWS. Azure and Google also provides private Docker registries. But registries are mainly used to hold Docker images. So images are actually the executable isolated packaged environment. That means when the images are run, they are run as containers. You can think of images as collection of multiple components glued together as an executable. When using Docker client, you run this docker run command. Docker daemon goes and picks up the image from the registry and runs the image as a container. So in this case, the container houses Java, Spring Boot, and Red Hat. Red Hat operating system, Java and Spring Boot framework. It could have been anything. It could have been Python, Flask, and SUSE. It could have been Node.js, Windows, etc. So basically, this container actually contains or houses this executable. So this container is running as an executable from the image. While running this docker run command, you have to provide the image tag basically, and then Docker daemon will pull the image and run it as a container. So images are nothing but executables of the isolated package. This orange box would have been an image in the registry, and when you run docker run, Docker daemon is running this image as a container. After discussing a little bit about Dockers, let's see the containers lifecycle, how this pull, push, and everything work. So we have something called Docker daemon. You install Docker daemon on a particular host. It can be on a virtual machine also. And then you have something called registry, where images are kept. Images are nothing but the executables of your entire package or your application package. It contains the application dependencies, it contains the application itself and the underlying operating system which would run your application. And you have installed Docker client in one of your laptops or maybe an office desktop. So suppose you already have an image stored in the registry and you want to do some modifications, you want to add some features or functionalities in your application. So use something called docker pull command. Using that command, you get the image to your personal laptop or office desktop. Do some modification on that program. Once the modification is done, you create the image using docker build command, and then you push the image in the Docker registry. So remember one thing, it does not necessarily has to be like this. What I mean by that is, if you are creating a new application, you do not need to run docker pull. You can create your application here, build the image, and then use docker push command to push the image in the registry. And after that, when you run the docker run command, and basically when you publish the docker run command in the Docker daemon pulls the image and runs it as a container. Well, enough theory, let's see some action. So we'll have some demo. What I'll do is I'll show you how to install a Docker daemon. We'll do that on a remote machine. Then I'll show you how to install Docker client. I'll install Docker client in my laptop, we'll use Dockerfile to package our application, and using Dockerfile, we'll create an image and push it to the Docker registry. And then using that image, we'll run a container in the host where Docker Daemon is running. Also, I'll show you how to run multiple containers on the same host. So basically, we'll be running more than one containers on the same host where Docker Daemon is running.